Happy Tuesday 10 at 10. I am your host, Richard Charpentier, and every Tuesday we get questions that are sent to Bakerpedia to answer your question within a 10-minute time frame. So let's get started. So the first question is someone asking for croissants. I said, do you mix the sugar with milk or just sprinkle the sugar on top of the milk washed croissant? We're talking about egg wash, minus the egg. There's different methods that you can use to create a shine or color for your croissants. And again, I recommend you go to Bakerpedia page and go look at all of the different listing that they have for egg washing, or you can search online. But basically, your question is asking whether or not you would put the sugar in the milk or on top of the croissant. My recommendation is melt your sugar, because if sugar is in the granule form, if you just put it on top, it's going to melt and it's going to leave little spots. And it's not going to be appealing. So it's best to warm up your milk and dissolve your sugar to create a wash. In terms of the ratio of how much sugar to milk, I do not know, but that's what I would do. And you should before, and again, apply it before baking, and it should create a nice, really shine on your croissant. Moving on to the next question regarding ascorbic acid. Can we use ascorbic acid for softness of frozen donuts or fried dough? So ascorbic acid is nothing else than vitamin C. It's a reducing agent when deprived of oxygen, and it's an oxidizing agent in mixing used in bakeries. What it does, it perform different functionalities, including lowering the overall pH and also giving more strength to bread doughs, to being used as an oxidizing agent. In order of a ascorbic acid giving you softness, I would say not by itself. It might, again, through science. Food chemistry is a very complex area to study. There's so many variables that you have to take into consideration. But in terms of ascorbic acid itself, no, it will not soften your dough. It's a combination of your entire formula, what you do, where is the pH, and everything, where baking is the art of baking, but also the science of baking. But a good question as well. Next question. Somebody wants to know from a previous question that was asked before as a follow-up on the fat melting point, and they're trying to understand the difference between low melting point, it's more designed for biscuits, to medium melting point, to higher melting point, and trying to get some clarification. So melting points is basically being changed by manufacturers of fats and oil. And to create you will hear the terminology plastic fat or liquid fat. And plastic is basically when they raise the melting point to different temperatures. And as my rule of thumb from being a baker is, if you get a fat at room temperature, which is about 18 to 20 degrees, or 74 to 78 degrees roughly. And if the fat, and you press on it and it's really hard, like cubes of palm shortening, then just think about it as your product is baked. When the product is cooled, the fat will recrystallize to its native state. So, and the fatty acids that are in there to, control your melt point will come back and recrystallize to where they are, sort of. So they can create, if you want a product that is very soft, you would want a melt point, or liquid. Maybe you use an oil. And personally, I always preferred oil, which when you think about, they have a melt point very, very low because they're liquid at room temperature, and they're better to create very fine crumbs, in my personal opinion, for cakes with the right emulsifiers and the right formulation. As you know, for example, puff pastry, anything that is with lamination is usually 104 to 112 Fahrenheit, which is 40 to 44 degrees Celsius. And bread shortening is being used too to retard stilling of the crumb and also lubrification of the protein, etc. So overall, where there's no straight answer to your question. Melt point is basically also how do you want to make your product and what are the qualities of your product. For example, for commercial bakeries, we used to have two different melt points for the same product, one for the winter and one for the summer. And the reason you might say, but why are you doing that? Because think about it. In the winter time, and if I live in Philadelphia, so the weather, every time in the winter, you drop temperature. So, and if you have a fat that has a really high melt point, let's say 120 Fahrenheit, and then at that point, that fat will be very solid at room temperature. So in the winter, it's going to be even more like a brick. So we learned that by lowering the melt point in the winter and help the product stay softer. So I hope it answers your questions about the melt points. Is there puff pastry is very particular because you process it cold enough and you're trying to get the puffing action once you layer the layer of fat with dough. But other than that, I would say go with what creates the best cake. And if butter is your choice, butter is a great fat. It's working with the fat, and it's not just saying I need to have that melting point unless your process requires it for. But a very good question, and I hope it helped out. Now for the next question, and it is the last question. Somebody wants to know about, can we use pgms instead of pge in waffle batter without eggs? And for those not familiarized, we're talking about emulsifiers. We're talking about polyglycerol ester, which is PGE, and polypropylene glycol monoester, PGME, and they're both emulsifiers. So just, if you want to know more about emulsifiers, I would go to what Dr. Lynn Carson wrote. There's a lot of great information on the Bakerpedia page where you can learn about the differences between one emulsifier versus the other. But overall, the way I look on emulsifiers, it basically comes down to four categories. One, there's the type of charge, whether or not they're ionic or non-ionic. So that makes a difference. There is the degree of solubility. Each emulsifier you're using has a difference in solubility within what your application you're trying to do. And there is the HLB, the hydrophilic lipophilic balance, which dictates the type of products you're trying to make. And there's also the type of the functional groups, because each of them, have, either water and oil or oil and water, etc. In the case of PGME and PGE, they're both ionic or non-ionic. I have to go to look back, but they're both very similar, but yet they're different. And based also I would look at the HLB, the hydrolipophilic balance of the one you have now. And if you're trying to replace eggs, because again, emulsifiers will whip and aerate, and they're able to basically bind and create more of a homogeneous, solution for you. And having no eggs to start with, this is something that if you do ask all of those questions to your provider and what you're trying to switch to, and you will have to do a lot of product development and trial and error work on the bench before just switching, because they will have different functionalities. So, and again, not knowing your formula, how much sugar and what grains you're using, it's very difficult to answer. Well, that's it, my friend. So thank you very much again. to tune in to Tuesday 10 at 10. I'm your host, Richard Charpentier. We'll see you next week, and happy baking. Thank you very much.